On today's show, Rockets Pelicans preseason preview. It's the dress rehearsal for the Houston Rockets. What do we want to learn about this team in the third preseason game? What adjustments do we want to see from the first two games already taking place? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Fridays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube, just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. On today's show, we're going to be getting into kind of a preview between the Rockets and Pelicans here for preseason game 3, the dress rehearsal, if you will, for the Houston Rockets as they are slowly ramping up ahead of the regular season. What are some of the expectations going into this game? What are some of the adjustments that we would like to see after having watched this team play its first two preseason games? What things are we looking to see them slowly improve as we approach their regular season opening night matchup with the defending champion OKC Thunder? And then a little bit later on in the show, we'll get into how the Rockets and Ime Udoka's coaching staff are kind of the trendsetters in the NBA, with other teams copying some of their schemes. And it's a pretty cool landmark, I guess, for this coaching staff. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. All right, I'm going to start with maybe just looking at the Pelicans matchup just as a whole first, and then we'll get into some of the things that we did see from this team last week in the first two preseason games, some of the adjustments and expectations. And I may ping pong around a little bit, but we'll focus on this game for the first couple segments, and then we'll do the trend setting stuff in the third segment. But first things first, I find this, the Pels matchup is going to be really interesting for a couple reasons. One, the Pelicans have been playing like some really like hardcore exhibition games, like overseas and whatnot, against non-NBA competition, against, I think they've been playing NBL teams. So they haven't super duper taken either of those two games very seriously. So this is going to be the Pels' first chance to play some NBA level competition in their preseason. So I'm fully expecting the Pelicans to, roll out the red carpet and to give the Rockets their a solid punch, right? Zion's been playing. I'm sure we'll see Herb Jones, we'll see Trey Murphy, guys who are being held out due to the, very loose nature of the exhibition games against the NBL squads in their first two preseason games. This feels like a good opportunity to get them warmed up against NBA level competition. But when you start to look at the Pelicans lineup and who they're trotting out as their kind of projected starting five, no DeJounte Murray for this team yet. He won't be able to possibly return until after New Year's Day this season. But outside of that, you've got Jordan Poole, you've got Herb Jones, you've got Trey Murphy, you've got Zion Williamson, you've got Kevon Looney. It's a very interesting starting five. And I think it's interesting because what it does is it puts the Rockets in this pickle of, okay, who becomes your Zion stopper in that starting five? Previously, that role would almost exclusively lie with Dillon Brooks, right? Dillon Brooks would take the toughest defensive assignment every single night, even if maybe Amin Thompson was better suited to guard that player. And in this lineup, we know that the Rockets have a guaranteed 4 in their starting lineup between Amin, Jabari, KD, and Sengun. So maybe Jabari draws the Zion assignment, but maybe they give it to Amin, and but then at that point, the lineups, the spacing, or no, not the spacing, I apologize, but the cross matches get a little funky at that point. And then that really begs the question, I know we saw it last week with Reed Shepherd starting alongside the other 4 quote unquote penciled in starters, but we also didn't have Steven Adams healthy and available for that game. So that's still a small possibility that that's a wrinkle in the starting lineup that we may see thrown out for this game. Ultimately, it does kind of feel like they've settled in on Reed being the fifth starter, and maybe Ime will come out and surprise everybody with a Steven Adams in the starting lineup, or maybe he starts Tari Eason from a matchup perspective, and that would allow Amin Thompson to be able to guard Jordan Poole. It would allow Tari Eason or Jabari Smith Jr. to be able to clamp Zion, and then you'd have the remaining couple guys, be it KD or whoever's left out of the Aries, to check both Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. Like, from a lineup and a matchup perspective, that feels like it's the best way to try and counter what the Pelicans are throwing out there with their starting lineup. And that's why I still settle in on the idea that, man, it'd be so nice if Ime was, I guess, a bit more fluid with the starting lineup and how he, chooses to deploy certain players or against certain matchups. Because if you just go with a default, it's going to be Reed Sheppard every single night, well, then where do you go with the matchups here, right? Reed Sheppard has to guard Jordan Poole. That's almost non-negotiable. Or unless maybe you let Reed Sheppard guard Herb Jones, and then you put Amin on Jordan Poole, you put Jabari on Zion, but then you put KD on Trey Murphy. Like, I just, it kind of shuffles the whole lineup down a peg where you're kind of having to more or less cover for Reed defensively and put him on an easier defensive assignment, as opposed to being able to really take advantage of your great point of attack defensive perimeter player in Amin Thompson to try and slow down the opposing team's best guard, finding the right defender to try and slow down Zion. There's a lot that you can get into from this thing defensively. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Ime tries to slow down Zion in this preseason game, what he elects to do starting lineup wise in this preseason game. And ultimately, I want to get a good look at the Pelicans, because genuinely, this Pelicans team on paper, if healthy, they kind of strike me as a play-in team. Maybe I'm too high on the Pelicans and what they could be this season. And I've got a good buddy of mine who's a Pelicans fan who's just super not bought into this team whatsoever. And I'm I'm looking at them on paper and I'm kind of into it a little bit. So we'll see what happens between, the starting lineup and the defensive matchups and whatnot. Offensively, there is a lot that we saw and learned about this team in the first two preseason games. Some of it looked really, really good. Some of it, not so much. Those are some of the adjustments I want to talk about here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss out on. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, $5 only, and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. FanDuel is great because it has so many different ways to play. You can build out parlays. You can try different player props. You can even follow the live betting lines during games. But hey, if you don't want to get into all of that, then you can just take a look at the outright betting favorites for the Super Bowl this season. Right now, the Bills sitting at plus 650, the Chiefs right behind them now, right on their tail, plus 700, the Packers plus 750, the Lions at plus 850, and then the Eagles in fifth place at plus 1,000. So for all those odds and so much more, visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Look, most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your smartphone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. They do all the heavy lifting. You can link your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever needing to touch a spreadsheet. When I started using Monarch, the categorization feature was awesome because I was able to finally organize my monthly expenses, the little subscription services and stuff, because there's nothing worse than you're going through your day, you get the notification, and bam, it, 15, 25, $30 for a subscription service that you don't even use anymore. And you're okay, I need to cancel it. I'll get rid of it, whatever. And then you forget to do it. And then fast forward to next month, and it's the exact same thing all over again. Rinse, wash, repeat. You're annoyed at yourself. Get your financial stuff under control with Monarch Money. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Okay, let's take a look at the Rockets and maybe some adjustments that we'd like to see from what we saw out of the first two preseason games, and hopefully some things to clean up, some things to note going into this third preseason game. First and foremost is that despite the offense still looking clunky at times in those first two games against the Hawks and the Jazz, the Rockets actually have the best offensive rating in all of preseason so far through these first two games. They have a 126.6 offensive rating. I mean, they've been dumpstering teams, right? You put up 122 the first game. You put up 140 in the next game. Like they haven't really been messing around. And it's been great to see that the Rockets have found some kind of a way to click offensively. Despite things still looking a little clunky with the ball handling situation, with Ime Thompson and Reed Sheppard looking a little fresh-faced at times. Things have looked really, really good when Alperen Sengun is on the floor. Having Kevin Durant is an automatic cheat code offensively, and even in the moments where Ime still looks a little, not a little tentative or a little, chaotic at times, operating the half court as a primary ball handler, he's still Ime Thompson. And he's still finding a way to dominate, especially when he's able to go back to kind of the role that he has been playing, which is more of an off-ball ancillary. That's the buzzword. I know you guys love it when I say ancillary. But that kind of piece that plays off of other guys. And so the Rockets offense has actually been one of the best things about this team through two preseason games. And look, yes, it's preseason. You take it with a grain of salt, a gigantic grain of salt, if you will. But even like the shooting from the team has looked solid. Jabari Smith Jr. has looked much more aggressive offensively. The amount of off-ball movement and motion that we've seen in the Rockets offense when Alperen Sengun has the ball, with guys cutting and going back door and, finding, being able to find open passing angles for Sengun to be able to hit, as opposed to just four dudes standing around stationary and no movement happening, which is what we dealt with and saw a lot of these past couple seasons with Alperen Sengun when he was trying to make things happen offensively for this team. So it really almost does feel like a brand new offensive playbook has been rolled out for this Rockets squad. And so that in and of itself is really, really exciting. I will say, the areas that I'm most interested to see out of this game, seeing as how this is going to be more so, again, Ime's talked about this being more of a dress rehearsal type environment where we'll probably get a better look at, again, the starting lineup like we already talked about. But in addition to the starting lineup, probably some things like substitution patterns, where he's planning to play certain guys, which lineups he's going to lean on, into the first quarter lineup, top of the second quarter lineup, potentially throwing out some haymaker lineups. Like we may actually get a good look in this game at like the 5-out, Ime Thompson lineup, where it's Ime and then, Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari, Eason, and then, I don't know, Reed Sheppard, Josh Okogie, take your pick, somebody else out there, defensive wrecking crew and 5-out spacing to kind of, accentuate Ime Thompson's strengths. We may get a good look at that one this game, hopefully. I'm very curious to see what ultimately, and Ime kind of did this a little bit last game against the Jazz, but I'm very curious to see how he's going to stagger Sengun and KD. Last game against the Jazz, he pulled Sengun out early, left KD in the game. Actually, I take that back. Am I mixing that up? No, he flipped that, right? KD came out. That's right. KD came out early. I misremembered that. And so to me, like, seeing how Ime decides that he's going to, figure out who plays the brunt of the first quarter minutes, who stays on the court longer, who's the one that's going to go up against the second units, right? And kind of balancing those two offensive pieces of your identity, because at the end of the day, you're going to need to have one of those two guys on the court pretty much at all times. There really shouldn't ever be a singular moment, except for maybe like a one-off defensive possession or something, to close the half or whatever, where you don't have one of Kevin Durant or Alperen Sengun out there on the floor to run the offense, because things do get and start to look a little shaky when it's just Ime Thompson out there, or if it's just Reed Sheppard out there running out. Really, and there should never be a point where there's Reed Sheppard out there with none of the big three. And that's the benefit to having, a top heavy team with three, one certified superstar, one on the way up superstar, and then one borderline all-star at this point between KD, Sengun, and Ime, is you should always have one of those three out there. And you could pretty much stagger it to where you always have two of the three out there on the floor, more or less. And so seeing the ways that Ime decides to tinker with his lineups and who he plays where and all of that, that's going to be one of the most interesting things to me about this game in particular, with it being the dress rehearsal. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I got to say, defensively, though, this team has left a lot to be desired. Even Ime's kind of harped on it a little bit. Ime kind of joked about it a little bit. But the Rockets have been the worst defensive team outside of the Utah Jazz and the Sacramento Kings in preseason. Like no exaggeration. Like that, they have been that bad. The only teams worse than the Rockets, Kings, and Jazz have been the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, the Hapoel Jerusalem BC, and the Gwangju Long Lions. So three of the exhibition teams have been worse than the Rockets. In fact, the Melbourne United had a better defense than the Rockets. They're 12th rated defensively so far on this list of preseason basketball teams. But I just, and weirdly enough, the Pelicans actually have one of the best defensive ratings in preseason so far. Now, granted, they played, the two NBL squads. So you take preseason with a bit of a grain of salt here, but the Atlanta Hawks project to be a good defensive team this season. They should be, and they've got a bunch of great defensive pieces. And the Rockets hung 122 points on them. They put 140 on the Jazz. So the offense is actually less so my worry through two preseason games. And I'm not going to say, I'm not raising alarm bells or anything yet. It's preseason. This is a veteran-laden team now. This is a team that understands they have championship aspirations. I don't expect them to be going all out in preseason. And maybe you chalk it up to a couple of really, really good shooting performances from Atlanta and Utah in these first couple games. Although Ime did mention when I asked him about the defense after the Jazz game that the Rockets are allowing way too many kick out threes, and they're not hustling and closing out fast enough to take away some of those opportunities. So he did highlight that that's an issue and something that they do need to address and clean up. To me, this team just can't lose their defensive identity, right? They still need to, at minimum, be a top 5 defense in the NBA, because even if they take a significant step forward offensively, even if they're in that 5 to 10 offensive range, I don't expect them to be good enough to be a top 5 offense this season. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, but if they lose their defensive identity, I think they lose what makes this team special. And that's the major concern after having lost Dillon Brooks in the trade for Kevin Durant, after having lost Fred VanVleet to a season-ending injury. You don't have Dorian Finney-Smith yet, who's supposed to be your Dillon Brooks, replacement. This team could kind of stumble a little bit out of the gate defensively. And that's going to be hard, as if you're in shootouts every single night where you have to rely on your offense to win games and not your defense, which has not been the case whatsoever for this team for the past couple of years. That's a dangerous game to play early on in the season when you're trying to establish that chemistry, establish your team's identity, figure out what this team looks like with Kevin Durant in tow, all these different things. And so for me, more so than the offensive side of things, more so than how these guys are continue to, mesh and grow on that end. Yes, the offense is exciting, and watching, KD and Sengun 2-man game, and Amin Thompson, watching all three of the stars ball out is exciting, and seeing how those guys continue to grow and mesh is going to be fun. I want to see this defense actually put forth a good defensive performance. And it doesn't even have to be for the whole game. I want to see them have a lockdown stretch, right? Kind of similar to the stretch that we saw the Rockets put together in the second quarter against the Jazz, when they had Tari, Eason out there in place of Kevin Durant, and it was the 5-man youth squad for the Rockets with Reed, Ime, Tari, Jabari, and Sengun. That lineup was running, they were gunning, they were defending, and that lineup, because they'd played together, because they had that cohesion, that chemistry, it felt like that was the best defensive lineup that the Rockets had put on the floor in that game in particular. Some of that has to do with Tari, Eason, and Thompson both being out there at the same time. Another potential feather in the cap of the argument of starting Tari Eason over Reed Sheppard potentially, right? Because if you want to maintain this team's defensive identity, then it might be a little bit harder to achieve that with Reed Sheppard in the starting lineup instead of another more proven defender like a Tari, Eason, or down the line when he's healthy, like a Dorian Finney-Smith type player. So very much looking forward to hopefully a good defensive performance, because frankly, the first two defensive performances have not been good from this Rocket squad. Coming up, want to talk about how Ime Udoka and his coaching staff are trendsetters in the NBA and how historically the Rockets have been trendsetters in the NBA at large. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. The Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching. It actually tracks your reps and suggests the right weights and corrects your form, making every rep safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. I want to know what you're looking for out of this Rockets third of their 4 preseason games here against the Pelicans. What are you trying to pay attention to from this Rockets team? What do you want to see out of this team? What do you not want to see out of this team, right? I didn't mention it specifically because I focused, a bit more on the defensive side of things, but some of the turnovers, right? Even though the Rockets didn't have a ton of turnovers last game against the Jazz or even against the Hawks, really, it felt like they had a lot of turnovers. Some of the turnovers just maybe felt louder than others, or some of the bobbled passes, that kind of thing. But then you look up and it's like against the Jazz, they only had, I think, like 11 or 12 turnovers, which is actually a really good number. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just being really nitpicky here in preseason, but that's what happens when you have a team with championship aspirations. All right, I want to highlight here a couple things. First off, we saw the other night the Denver Nuggets running their version of their own double big lineup with Nikola Jokic and Jonas Valanciunas, 2 legitimate 7-foot behemoths, sharing the floor at the same time. And they were running the exact same zone defense that the Rockets run when they were running their double big of Alperen Sengun and Steven Adams starting last season. And I think that this is one of those really interesting things about how the NBA operates, is it truly is a copycat league. Like, one team will find a wrinkle or an offensive advantage or something that other teams aren't doing just yet, and they'll use that as their competitive edge. And then slowly, sometimes quickly, other teams will catch on, and other teams will say, oh, you know what? That looks really good. Let's try that ourselves and see if we can do a better version of that, or see how it works for us. And it's just funny that, the Rockets navigated most of last season with Sengun and Adams on the roster together. And it wasn't until, by necessity, getting decimated by Anthony Davis and the Mavericks, that the Rockets were like, hey, screw it. Let's put 2 big guys out there and see what happens. And then they just kind of rolled with it. And then it turned out to be one of their best, most effective lineups of the entire season. They leaned on it heavily in the playoffs. And now they went and they doubled down on it by going and getting another big to add to the group in Clint Capela. So another dynamic for the double big lineup. And now you're seeing other NBA teams kind of copy that a little bit, to where, I think that we've slowly started to see this resurgence of the double big in the NBA landscape, right? There are a lot of double bigs out there. When you go look at the Cleveland Cavaliers with Mobley and Allen, you look at the Knicks now starting Karl-Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson together. You go to the Timberwolves, who were doing it with Karl-Anthony Towns and Gobert. Now they're doing it with Gobert and Julius Randle, or even at times they run Gobert and Naz Reid out there at the same time. You could maybe look at, a team like the Bucks with Miles Turner and Giannis as a pseudo version of like the double big lineup, although those guys are more like not traditional, like lumbering bigs. But even now you got the Denver Nuggets with Jokic and Valanciunas sharing the court together, which is kind of nuts. And we're seeing this trend, and we're seeing, this version of the Nuggets with Jokic and Valanciunas and that kind of wonky zone defense that the Rockets have been running. That was all engineered by Ime Udoka. And so now I can't give Ime full credit because kind of the resurgence of the double big started happening before Ime unveiled his version of it this past season. But I do just think it's so interesting how teams have, copycatted certain things and how they're looking at the Rockets version of the double big and saying, you know what? All right, we'll put a bunch of size out there. We'll put size, we'll put length, and we'll run zone defense and we'll see what it looks like. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we started to see a few other teams maybe throw out some legitimate double bigs. We're going to probably see the Spurs do it a lot with Wemby and Luke Cornett and Kelly Olynyk. They've got a ton of size and length that they can throw out there as well. And it's not the first time either that the Rockets have been on kind of the cutting edge of a new trend in the NBA landscape. Oh, and the defending champions, obviously, with Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein. That's kind of the premier double big in the NBA that won it all this past season. But, the Rockets have always been at the forefront of, figuring out what the next competitive advantage is in the NBA. And it's funny because just not even, I was going to say a short, 8 years ago. 8 years is such a long time. But 7-8 years ago, the Rockets prioritized going small, right? They found a way. They said, you know what? All right, we're gonna optimize. We're gonna go small. We're gonna play with these small ball lineups. They did that to counteract the Golden State Warriors, right? They had their own iteration, their own version of kind of the death lineup where they would roll out Chris Paul, James Harden, Trevor Ariza, PJ Tucker, Luka Mbamute, right? And that was their switch everything, super versatile, 5-out spacing, let James Harden cook kind of lineup. Then the following year, they traded Clint Capela to optimize the space for Russell Westbrook. They made PJ Tucker the starting 5. Like, this Rocket team has never been shy about trying to tap into whatever that version of the competitive advantage is that they view. And this most recent iteration with the double bigs, with Alperen Sengun, with Steven Adams, with the addition of Clint Capela, continues to be the direction it feels like not just the Rockets, but the rest of the NBA is kind of going, right? We've talked about this before, kind of the resurgence of the big man in the NBA landscape, the renaissance of bigs occurring in the NBA. And this kind of feels like another step in that direction where, in order to counteract this whole idea of positionless basketball and guys who are all, 6'7", 6'8", who can guard, 1 through 5, like, you try throwing a 6'8" dude on a legit 7-footer down low to guard him, defensively, or to try to keep him, boxed out on the offensive glass, things like that. It's not going to end well for you, right? You put a 6'8" wing on Steven Adams down low, you're going to need a couple of those guys at minimum to keep him off the glass. And even then, it's not a guarantee. And so this feels like the next step in the evolution of the NBA to kind of counteract this version of positionless basketball that we've seen for a number of years now. And it's going to vacillate. It's going to, kind of seesaw back and forth. And we'll see the bigs make a really big splash, on the scene for the next probably few seasons. And then we'll see it kind of vacillate back, and we'll see it, we'll see another competitive advantage pop back up. I just think it's really cool that organizationally, the Rockets have kind of been right there at the front of the pack. Like, they're not one of the teams like at the back being like, oh, everybody has double bigs and we're still running positionless 5-out basketball. Oh crap, we're behind the 8 ball now. Like, no, they're one of the first teams to adopt it and lean further into it. And they've been that way historically. So just credit to the Rockets, front office for kind of identifying these trends, for the coaching staff to lean into it and all that stuff. So I don't know. I just felt like highlighting that. I thought it was worthwhile to point out. And it was also really funny watching Jokic and Valanciunas try and replicate what Adams and Sengun do, because a lot of what Adams and Sengun do works so well, in particular because Adams is a great anchor out of that 5 spot defensively, and Sengun is much more mobile than either of Jokic or Valanciunas on the perimeter. So I don't know if Denver's double big is ever going to be as effective as the Rockets double big. It might, just because Jokic is Jokic, but we'll see. It'll be. I'm very much looking forward to the first Rockets Nuggets matchup this season, though, when we get Jokic and Valanciunas versus Adams and Sengun. That is going to be like popcorn bucket. Get your tickets out, movie, Showtime, whatever. I'm very excited for that matchup down the line. But that's going to do it for today's episode. I want to know, again, what you're looking forward to out of Rockets preseason game 3 against the New Orleans Pelicans. Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.